You're with science, you're basically looking at the how, when, where something happened. But with religion, you're looking at why. And those are very different questions. Science is based on data. You've got to have that data to support whatever the theory is that you're proposing. And that theory is out there for other scientists to shoot down in any way they can, but they have to have the data to prove it. That you don't really prove things in science, you support hypotheses, you support theories, but as more and more data is gathered, with evolution, it has just become stronger and stronger over the years. Other comments?
Remind everybody that you're probably muted, so please unmute.
Remind everybody what, Brian?
Everybody's muted, so.
Oh, you're all muted, so unmute yourselves, please. Comments? Questions?
Brian, could we stop the screen share so we could see the other speakers?
I like the screen share.
Let me see if there's one, there may be
Never
another.
mind.
Wait a minute, there may be another. Did you just stop it, Brian?
I did. You want me to share it again?
Yeah, because the references are up there and some people wanted the references for the
Okay.
talk. So let me get one more up here.
Share from the computer run.
Again, many, many thanks to Brian and David for the electronic support for these talks.
I was happy that we were told about the Fantastic Fungi show that was on Netflix. That was really amazing in every way.
It was. And that brings up a question I have for David. In that particular show, it talked a lot about the psilocybin that David has done research on for a number of years. And one of the comments that was made in there that was that the psilocybin can stimulate nerve growth. And I was wondering if that has been used as a potential to help Alzheimer's patients or people with nerve damage from whatever injuries that they might have incurred. Do you know, David?
Not that I know of.
Okay, he says not that he knows of at this point. But that was an incredible show. It's on Netflix. It's called Fantastic Fungi. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it.
I thought it was so interesting that Paul was a stutterer and he took too much psilocybin. And at the end of that, he was not stuttering anymore. He asked and asked over and over, let me stop stuttering, because it had blocked a lot of things that he wanted to do in his life. And then after that, he didn't stutter anymore. I thought that was pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
That a mushroom could change that for him.
Just be careful how many of them you take, Sue.
Well, that's what he said. He didn't know how much to take, so he took way too many. So.
What you see on the screen now is just some of the references that I used. The one at the top, The Entangled Life, is absolutely fascinating. It's an easy read, and it goes into more details than I've gone into in these talks, but it's one that the others were interesting too, very interesting. But that Entangled Life is phenomenal.
So I'll address your question.
Okay.
Okay, so the question is belief in evolution incompatible with belief in God? And I think the answer is no. But is incompatible with some forms of religion. For example, evolution and biblical literalism
Mhm,
do not do well together.
mhm,
And it changes also your perspective of who God is and what God does.
Mhm.
Which is really, is profound. I mean, those are big things.
Mhm.
You know, how many churches in this area in which we live proclaim that the Bible is the inerrant, inspired word of God, and evolution essentially disputes that,
Mhm.
or it causes you to shift to a non-literal interpretation of the Bible,
Mhm.
which is an enormous step for a huge portion of the population.
Did everybody hear that okay?
Yeah.
No, not really. Say it again, Julie, what he said, please.
Well, he's just talking about the fact that certainly in this part of the country, there is a great deal of separation between evolution theory and religion. The fact that it's not even considered because they believe in the divine word of God, that everything was made through miracles, all of these things that basically can be explained in the natural world by science at this point. And yet they refute that. And so you have a lot of people here in this area and in many parts of the country who still do not understand evolution, which is why this series began. It was to give people an idea of what it's all about, what it means. It simply means change. And all you have to do is to look at how humans and all organisms have changed through time. Look at the fossil record, which I'm sure they probably don't believe in either, but look at all of these things that have supported the concept of evolution, especially the cell and molecular biology. And that is totally wiped off the table for these folks. And I don't know how to reach them, if we can reach them.
I was reading last night about a very, very early Christian theologian who later was attacked. I mean, we're talking about 300, the 4th century, who did not believe that God the Father was anthropomorphic. It wasn't a person like we are, but as a mysterious force. And I think, you know, as David said, it depends on how you see God.
Mhm.
You know the name of that person, Jane?
I'm probably mispronouncing his name, Oregon or Origin.
Okay,
Oh, I've
Origin.
heard of him.
yeah.
Yeah.
Origin, you got it. Yep.
Well, and a lot of it depends on how you define God too. I remember a number of years ago, we had a minister who described religion as this lake. And there are different wells that are submersed in that lake. And one may be for Christianity, one may be for Buddhism, one may be for Islam, the various religions of the world. We basically go down to a common core when you think about it. And it's the details that seem to separate us and keep us apart in these various interpretations of religion. And a number of those accept evolution. They have no problems with evolution. But in our country, certainly with Christianity, it seems to be an issue, which is unfortunate.
I think in most religions that love your neighbor as yourself, or do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is a part of all religions.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
And there's a hymn, God in Three Persons, that we sing, God in Three Persons.
Persons, blessed Trinity.
That's me, yes. So it's all such a mystery. It's hard for people to understand and to think, God could be in me, I could be in God. How else could you be, actually? But a lot of people just can't go there in their mind to realize that that's the truth of it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's the problem with getting evolution across to these folks is well, as soon as they hear the word, they shut down. And you can see the blinds come down in their eyes. And it's like, nope, I don't want to hear it, that kind of thing. And it's so unfortunate because life is it's a continuation of learning. And the older we get, I think the more we learn about our world, about each other, about what's right and what's wrong. And religion supports that. And evolution tells us why we're behaving this way, why we're doing so many of these things, if you look back at our history.
Why is it so threatening to these people to even contemplate evolution?
Because they think God isn't needed for that, that it's strictly a natural phenomenon that occurs without the intervention of God. And that's what bothers them. They think that, that the world was created in 7 days and we're all descendants of Adam and Eve. They think all of these things are literal. And they can't understand the concept of billions of years and how this world has evolved over that time frame.
They don't like having monkeys as relatives.
And that's a major misinterpretation. Talk about fake news. Because if you look at what evolution is trying to get at is common ancestry. And if you look at the genes, especially now that we know the genetic makeup of so many organisms, the more genes that we share with an individual, the more closely related we are. We're certainly more closely related to the great apes than we are to a jellyfish. Okay, I mean, that's pretty common. And that really bothers them that people have said, well, we come from apes. We come from a common ancestor that goes back to that single-celled organism in the ocean that gave rise to the plants and it gave rise to the animals. That's where it goes back to. And that organism doesn't look anything like any of us today. But through the process of evolution, through the process of time, we have become who we are.
Of course, it goes beyond evolution. I mean, that's sort of the current version, but religious dogma has had trouble with science on other issues as well. Galileo was persecuted because he did not agree that the earth was at the center of the universe.
Yeah.
Well, there was, at the time, these stories that are in the Old Testament came in, I don't think there was any difference between science and religion. I think it was all the same thing at first. And so, because the how could not be explained by observation very well, they didn't, have the studies for that. It was all part of religion. And so when you start parsing that out, it seems to, maybe to some observers, to weaken religion or God and make their the doctrine weaker, and therefore weakens the church and the religion of putting the power in the authority of the church and of people being the dominant species, and that everything is here for us. And all of those, I think that understanding evolution helps us to see that it's not about us. It's about everything being connected. One book that addresses some of the subtleties and the big things of this process of Darwin and some contemporaries of Darwin also who were independently tracking these thoughts of this theory of evolution, is how that was compatible with God and with original sin and with Jesus as a redeemer and with the morality of mankind. And those things are very complicated questions when you really put them to the test. One book that discusses Darwin's struggle with this is The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert, if you read that. But it's a very complicated fungal sort of question and process over the centuries to understand. I don't understand it.
Julie, I think it's very important that we recognize the nuances throughout history. I mean, Gregor Mendel was a contemporary of Mendel, a contemporary of Darwin. He was a monk, and yet he was a geneticist. He was a scientist. He was not vilifying. And there were a lot of people during Darwin's time that claimed that he was an atheist, but he wasn't. You read his actual words in his books. He was a very spiritual person, and he didn't deny the existence of God. So, even today, I think it's very careful. We have to be careful that we don't paint everybody with the same brush. There are people who are threatened, yes, but there's a whole lot of people that are able to understand all sorts of nuances. In the church that my parents went to when I was a young person, they believed that God directed evolution. That yes, it took billions of years or whatever it is for this to happen, but God was in control of it and God directed it. That's a nuance that we're not, that we here right today are not acknowledging. It's not an either or situation, that there are all sorts of people along the continuum in belief.
And I think that last point you made is very important because I've had discussions with students and with others over the years about this concept. And they say, well, I just believe that God made everything. And I look at them and I say, but how did he do it?
Yeah.
I said, miracles don't happen in science. There's a basis for what goes on. And if you think about why or how something happened, evolution may have been his method. And they just look at me, but anyway, I lasted 24 years without getting fired. It could have been close.
I can understand though why they are so threatened by it. Actually, I mean, it's easy to say, why don't they see it from our perspective? But they're so threatened by it because this whole way of looking at the world is kind of magical thinking, almost the way they look at the world. And all of science threatens that, whether dealing with climate change or evolution or other things in science. And it, their world it's like a house of cards. It's falling down, and what are they left with then? So you can understand why they're so threatened by it.
In that vein, and I've had plenty of arguments with biblical literalists about this, is that their contention is that if there's anything about the Bible, any one tiny little thing about the Bible that's incorrect, that invalidates the entire thing. That's the position that they take. And I think that position is common, and I don't really understand it, because the finest and most authoritative textbooks in science or any field have errors in them. And it doesn't invalidate the whole book. It just means, that's why there's errata, why they issue corrections and because they're mistakes. But for some reason, that doesn't seem to apply to the Bible.
Because you're calling into question the prominence of the book to begin with. I mean, all those science books, right, are written, we know are written by people.
I see. Yeah, right.
I think.
I think also we have to realize that science has taken issue with religion too. The one I'm most familiar with is Sigmund Freud, who believed that as a result of modern science, that religion was just sort of an ancient crutch that was now obsolete. I think the people of science haven't been entirely blameless in this conflict.
Oh, right. I think that it's seeing it as us and them. I mean, even though one person is trying to explain something that makes perfect sense to another person, then it seems, I don't know. I don't know that it's helpful when I take that approach, because I see my friends when I think that way as, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? But, science has missed so much in the realm of its literalism as well.
So to that point, and to Julie's earlier point, there's a paper that came out 2 weeks ago from Johns Hopkins about the beneficial effect of psilocybin on patients with major depressive disorder, right? And the results were astonishing, just a profoundly effective drug to treat major depressive disorder in patients for whom nothing else has worked. And it's not the first study of its kind, but it's yet another study. And one of the things that they look for is the relationship between the mystical experience, right? Where the mystical experience embodies those things that we would call often a religious experience. And the strength of that type, that quality of the experience, and the palliative effects of the drugs are significant. So the takeaway message is that science has evidence that mystical or religious experience can be helpful. It can be beneficial. It can help us overcome extremely challenging conditions. And there's scientific evidence for that one of the patients in one of the earlier studies was quoted as saying, "I am an atheist. I don't believe in religion. I don't believe any of that mess. But yet I felt that I was embraced by God, right, during this experience." And, those two things don't seem to fit together at all. She's an atheist, but she believes that she experienced God, and she was one of the cancer patients, cancer study, that benefited tremendously from this quote unquote religious experience, but yet she doesn't believe in any of it. So there's a contradiction, but this is evidence that science is providing, that science has not paid attention to significantly at any times in the past. Just as Lydia was saying, it's really, and Jack was saying as well, that science has really discounted religion as being hogwash or valueless, and apparently it's not.
And I think one of the fundamental differences that hints at exactly what you're getting at, and this this pushback we're talking about from fundamentalism especially, is because I think we are both using the word God to mean very different things. And I think historically, humanity has used God to explain things about our universe and our, the world around us that we can't explain. And so I think in a pre-modern religion, which is sort of what I'm using to describe fundamentalism, not in that it's, backwards or something, but that the mindset is pre-modern. Or maybe even modern, whereas I think our definition of God, for many of us in this church and many of us that don't have a problem in the conflict, is a more postmodern definition of God. It's not an understanding of the divine that relies on, a supernatural being that intercedes in the universe. It's an understanding of God as something that's fundamentally a part of the universe.
And
But yeah,
what I think, and they haven't parsed the data as I know I'm well enough to pull this fact out, but I think that the palliative effect of the psychedelic drugs is that they help the patients establish what the patient believes is a personal connection, right? A personal connection to God or something greater than themselves that's, permeates all of the universe and everything in it. But it's that personal relationship that provides such benefit. And I think, to your point, that what has happened is that we kind of know this intuitively at some level. We all kind of know this. And so that we try to construct religions and gods in ways that facilitate our experience of God as being a personal being in our lives that we have a personal relationship with, right? And so for various people, because of their education, socio-cultural things, whatever, have an easier time with some of those constructs than they do with others.
absolutely. I think that's true of all of us on either side of that divide.
Yeah, right. I think it's universally true. And at some point, as Gary pointed out, those relationships become very crystalline and very fragile, like, castles made of spun sugar.
Sure.
Where if you break this little piece, the whole thing will collapse, which is unfortunate, but that's what those people have to deal with. That's what they have.
Yeah.
Right. And that's an idea that for many people that's worth dying for. That's how important it is.
Last Sunday, I thought Amber's sermon was very touching. And
It was.
is that she grew up in a church that they did not believe in evolution. And she went there from the time she was 5 or something to 18. So then she talked about how much our church had meant to her on how we view evolution. So, and it was very heartfelt for her. And I could feel all of her emotion and what she had lived through and how much she appreciated being a part of our community. Thank you, everybody.
She also went to a very conservative school where the word evolution was never mentioned. So for her, our church has been a real eye opener in many ways. And she was very, very grateful.
Yes. And we're grateful for her to be with us.
Yeah.
To get back to some data, a recent Pew, well, it was in 2011, 49% of the public believe that the Bible is not literal, but inspired by God. 30% believe the Bible is a literal interpretation. 17% believe the Bible is a book of fables and legends. So when we talk about those people, we're talking about 30% of the population. It's a significant group of people, but it's not even the majority.
But we live in the Bible Belt.
But to give you some more data about the Bible Belt here, the research is that only 50% of the people here belong to a church, any faith community.
Yeah.
Only 50%. Now, if you go to Minnesota or New York or whatever, it's much, much higher. I can provide that. I'd have to look up where I got that, but it's the Archives of Religious Data or something like that. So when we talk about those people, we're still talking about a small group.
Well, I know a lot of them.
We need a lot of them. They
How
stick
well
in
are
our
they?
minds. They stick in our minds because we have the most unpleasant experiences with them.
Which is
How many of them?
brings me to my point, why are we threatened by them?
Exactly.
Because they're in our legislature.
Yes.
Well,
But you know, Larry, if we go back to what Julie was talking about at the very beginning of the first talk, our country is near the bottom in the world in terms of the percentage of people who endorse evolution. So it may not be a majority of the people in this country, but it's a lot more than anywhere else in the world.
Except Turkey.
Yeah.
We're just above Turkey.
But true, it's a large percentage.
Well,
But it's
why
not-
don't we tell-
It's not a majority yet.
to that, just to follow up on that, yeah, but you know, those people are driven, right? They have a mission.
Who are those people?
Those, the
people?
30%, the 30%.
Well, listen to our language. Listen to our language. We're calling them those people.
Thank you, Larry.
I want us to examine, and I guess it's been building with me, examine our bias against those people. Now, those people have hurt us in terms of gender identity and all kinds of stuff, but they're unredeemable when we call them those people.
Well, granted, and that's a point well made. I wasn't in the redeeming the mode at the moment.
Thank you, Larry.
Be honest about it, yeah.
But I would say they have an outsized representation. The people in that demographic, right, have an outsized representation in influence that, you know, that they seem to occupy a large proportion of our legislature. They're in the news.
Yeah.
They have a lot of exposure and a lot of influence.
And trust me, if you've worked with those people for 24 years, you hear a lot. So, well, folks, thank you so much for this discussion. It's been good having everybody with me the last few weeks. I think we're about ready to head upstairs and hear one more sermon on evolution from Brian. It sounds like a fascinating topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Julie.
Thank you.
That went fast.
Yeah, yeah.